Jodi and Megan, I'm so happy to see you both, as always.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, nice to be with you.
So, gosh, first off, is it bizarre for you? I mean, this is a new situation. You all have interviewed other people your entire careers. With She Said, you started being on the other side of the table. Have you gotten used to being the subject instead of the reporter?
No, we're totally flabbergasted. I mean, we started out investigating a Hollywood producer. So even with this movie coming out and even with, ads everywhere and people asking us about it, we're still honestly a little confused about how likenesses of ourself ended up on the big screen.
I'm sure. I mean, Megan, is it freaky for you? Are you still getting used to it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this process began as they were making the film, and Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan spent time with me and Jodi as they were preparing to play us. They asked us questions. They observed us. All the things that we're accustomed to doing as reporters, carefully observing our sources and figuring out what information to extract in our telling of stories, in our articles. And so to watch them have conducted that research on us and to now see that expressed on the big screen is certainly surreal. But we're also really impressed with the care that they took.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, did they follow you around at the Times? Did they follow you around at home? I mean, what was that like, Jodi? You had Zoe, obviously, who played you in the movie. Did she spend time with you at home and at work?
Absolutely. But the blueprint was really our book. As you know, after the Weinstein investigation and after Me Too blew up globally, we felt like the story did not just belong to us, it belonged to everybody. And we wrote our book to take people behind the scenes into the process. I mean, there was, remember that we didn't know if we would get the story and we didn't know if anyone would care. And, Weinstein turns out to have been more manipulative than we knew at the time. And also, we really wanted to highlight our sources. I mean, in the book, we wanted to show that this was not just Hollywood actresses.
Right.
This was a series of women, including some who were not famous at all, who made a brave series of decisions to help us and had extraordinary impact as a result. So the book, I think, was kind of the blueprint for the film. And then the filmmakers and the actors did spend some time with us. They, had a zillion questions for us. But we had questions for them, too, because we're reporters and we want to know how things work and what we were getting into. So I think it was sort of a mutual question-asking process.
I remember reading, I think, Megan, that Carey Mulligan would ask you how you felt at certain junctures when you were covering this story, when a source came through, when Harvey's lawyer was kind of talking to you. And she really tried to incorporate, I think, as did Zoe, Jodi, kind of the emotional experience for you all as reporters, the frustration, the jubilation when somebody would come forward. Tell me about that and watching her mimic you on the big screen.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, Carey, when she was, Zoe lives here in Brooklyn, and so she and Jodi were able to kind of connect and start spending time together. For when Carey first got the part, she was living in England, and so we first connected over Zoom, and then when she relocated to New York for filming, she actually moved into our neighborhood in Park Slope with her family, and so over a course of some weeks, we spent time together in person, and we had play dates with our children, and which I think she was observing, not just what I was like professionally, but also what I was like in my home life, with my husband, with my daughter. Because as you know, this movie also depicts Jodi and I in our private lives, which is a huge leap for us and something we were also, I think, made us feel a little bit vulnerable.
Well, how did you, A, why did you say yes to that? Mm-hmm. And B, how did you feel seeing that portrayed? First of all, obviously you have rock star husbands who are so supportive of you all professionally. But it did show some intimate stuff about your home life. And Megan had talked about some postpartum depression issues that you were having. I mean, was that a tough decision for you to open your lives up in that way?
I mean, I would say that it was there. Yes, it was a little bit. I think we did feel vulnerable, as I was saying, but we also felt like this movie was an opportunity to do something I think that's pretty rare in movies, which is to depict the lives of working women. And, we aren't just living in the newsroom. We aren't just, in many ways, we are living our stories, but we do, especially in my case, I had a newborn when I first started this investigation. It was a story I started right when we came back from maternity leave. Jodi had 2 daughters, including a very young toddler at the time. And so I think that it would have been an incomplete story if you didn't show some of the struggles that come with that, but also some of the real satisfaction that comes from doing work that we think can hopefully impact our daughters. And so I think that while we felt vulnerable in opening ourselves up that way to be depicted on the screen in our private lives, I think that there's a big payoff. And I think that a lot of women are going to see themselves reflected back in this movie, and no matter what their line of work.
And also, it's a film about the truth. I mean, it really is. And like beyond, any vanity or vulnerability about, oh, I look this way on screen or I look that way on screen, the main thing that they captured that's so, so, so important is the sincerity of the journalism and the sources. It's such a gift to see a depiction of journalism as we try to practice it. I mean, there are so many representations of journalists in which, you've seen this, Katie, like we're shown to be manipulative or doing it for the wrong reasons. I think of the Harry Potter books and, Rita Skeeter, the journalist character, is like the lowest of the low. And I always think this is the book we give to kids who read, kids who love to read. We're telling them that like a journalist is a terrible, terrible person. And I think that, the biggest compliment the filmmakers paid, not just to Megan and I, but, to the New York Times and journalists all over the world, is to show that, it's not glamorous. It's really hard. You're asking people to take really big risks. You're asking questions that may seem inappropriate.
It's not a 9-to-5 job. You are sort of called in the middle of the night.
You don't know what you're going to find. There's no guarantee. But the truth is really powerful, and these stories matter. I mean, for a lot of these women, for a lot of these women, these were stories they had tried to leave in the past. These were they were like, really, like this personal thing that happened to me years ago, like it really has significance. And I think the movie says, yes, it has significance. It really matters to people.
There's a powerful moment in the film, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's sort of a bit of a eureka journalistic moment for the two of you when you realize that if the women come together, it will be much easier for them to tell their stories. In other words, sort of there being power in numbers. And I do think that the movie does an extraordinary job of showing the damage that Harvey Weinstein did to so many young women. Can you talk about that and Megan, and how you feel that was portrayed and why that was so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Jodi pointed out, we really, it was a bit of a leap for us to allow, to turn over this investigation to filmmakers. And even in a lot of the movies that have been made about journalism, you may get to know the journalists, but you don't necessarily get to know the sources. And so that was something that we really hoped would be part of this film. And it is. I think that's one of the things that's most remarkable is that for a lot of people, they associate the Weinstein story with all of these famous actresses who came forward. And this movie really shines light on some of the more regular women, the women who had worked for him as assistants or as junior executives in his company. They went to work for him because, like so many women starting out at like 21 or 22 or 24, they wanted to break into this industry. They thought that it was going to be, a window into a world in which they could succeed behind the scenes as producers, in other roles. And instead they experienced attacks and harassment and abuse. And to see in this movie the toll that has taken on their lives, these women who are in many ways leading just what you'd bump into in your local cafe or at school drop-off with kids, to see the toll that this has taken on them so many years later. I mean, it wrote them out of the industry. They basically, and one of the women, Zelda Perkins, who was a source in this story, who had been silenced by Weinstein. There's a wonderful scene, true to life scene, where she's meeting with Jodi, and she says, and she left. She basically went off to Guatemala after this happened. She literally fled, not just the industry but the country. And so I think you can see. I think that the film does a really great job of capturing the toll that this takes, not just in the moment but for decades to come.
I think doing research for my book and talking to some of the people who had been victimized by Matt, I was astounded by the trauma that still exists today, the residual trauma, and how much it has shaped their lives going forward. And it was very true, obviously, with all the victims. And in fact, the movie starts with the young, is that Zelda? I can't remember. Remember
Laura
the short
Madden.
hair? Okay. The movie starts with the young Laura Madden, running, and then you revisit her. And I don't know, I just think it's so powerful because I think so often this kind of behavior has been dismissed, like, oh, get over it. And I think it's so important to show the lifelong ramifications of this.
Exactly. People think the Weinstein story is about sex, and of course it's about sexual misconduct, but it's really about work. These women, what unites all of these women with Weinstein stories is that whether they were actresses or assistants, they wanted opportunity. They wanted a piece of the action, and Weinstein used that to make them vulnerable. This wasn't like a producer meeting women in a bar. It was always a work situation. I have a script I want to show you. Come up to my room to watch the dailies. And so for a lot of those women, part of the loss is the career loss.
Yes.
The feeling like I can't get those years back. That's like I'm 40-something, 50-something years old now, and it's never going to happen for me in the same way that it could have.
But also,
And
Jodi,
also,
the shame, I was going to say,
Yeah.
the shame that continues to haunt them as adults.
Yeah, and one of the things, I think this film finally lets us confront something that was always a little uncomfortable in our relationship with them, which is that we've had such a supportive workplace, and in the film you see these editors gently pushing us forward and kind of, pushing us to do better.
Standing up for you.
Standing up, protecting us, but also standing up for us, but kind of also thrusting us forward. Weinstein always wanted to talk to Dean Baquet, the big boss, man to man, and he says, talk to my reporters. So you've got this sort of series of great bosses flanking us, and I think in the film they become a kind of implicit contrast to Weinstein.
I think one of the most powerful scenes that really captures what we're talking about is Laura Madden, the young woman who the movie opens on, as she's right at the beginning of her career working for Weinstein, and you see her fleeing this terrible attack that's happened. And as Jodi gets to know her in the movie, she says at one point, he basically took my voice, right when I was coming into it. And I think that really captures so much of what we're talking about.
I'm sure other people will ask this, but having read the book and having loved the book and then watched the movie, it's always hard, right? Some things had to be left out. So how did you feel when you first saw the movie? Did you think, oh, they really captured the essence of the story of the victims, of us, who we are? Mm-hmm. Or was there any part of you that was a little wah, wah?
I think we're really comfortable with this film as a work of art that's based on real events. It's kind of like there are three categories in the film. There really are some scenes that are so true to life. I mean, dialogue that we recorded in these interviews, got a transcript of, used for the book, and then the screenwriter, Rebecca Lenkowitz, used it too. Then there's a category of stuff that, of course, is like invented or altered or a little bit different because they're making a feature film, not a documentary. And part of their goal is to produce something, that keeps you glued and is really, and is has that kind of galvanizing feeling of watching a journalistic procedural. And then, it's funny, there's kind of this third category that's the most interesting of all, of stuff that did not actually happen in real life, but is like very true in a non-literal way. Like there's the scene where Megan's character tells off a guy in the bar who's harassing the reporters. And it's funny if you know Megan, because it did not happen that way in real life. But I mean, it's kind of something you would do, right?
I mean, it didn't happen with my boss and my reporting partner, but it has happened in the past in other situations.
So it was sort of character-wise in terms of your personality, and it felt true.
Yeah, and the book is our place to keep a really precise record. Like if people want to come into the true investigation and like really inhale the details and know that everything they're reading is precise, then the book is, we've got a place to do that, already. And so I think the movie can kind of live on a parallel track as something that's, a little different, but that, where we can really appreciate and celebrate.
You obviously got to know Zoe and Carey in this process. Were you consulted, by the way? Did they say, hey, we're thinking about casting Zoe as you, Jodi, and Carey as you, Megan?
No, they did. I mean, they did do a lot of consulting with us. And so that's something that we really appreciated along the way. We recognized that didn't necessarily have to be the case. So they were, while it's not a documentary, the filmmakers did spend a lot of time consulting with us because I think they wanted to get this right, as to do this depiction with as much accuracy and integrity as possible, knowing that you can make a documentary. And so
when you heard about the actresses who were going to when you heard about the actors who were going to be portraying you, were you like, oh yeah, I can see that works?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you don't ever, Jodi and I didn't sort of spend. We've been in this business, for like 20 years, and I can't say that there's, as journalists, you don't walk around ever imagining that you're going to be depicted.
Who would play me in the movie?
Right, you're never kind of going about your reporting thinking like, wow, if somebody was depicting me on the big screen, who would it be? So I don't think that we had spent a ton of time contemplating who those people might be, but when they came to us with the casting decisions that they had made, we were thrilled. Not only because these two actresses are so accomplished, but they also have like a really special friendship. So
they do.
They've worked
together.
I didn't
know that.
Yes, yeah. They have. They are very close. Like they came in with a pre-existing partnership and love for each other that I think actually you can see on the screen. So for Jodi and I, that was also something that seemed like, aha, like what a great fit for this, to play our partnership.
Having said that, you guys were thrown together really to do this reporting and kind of put together as a team, and your relationship has obviously evolved to a true friendship, unless you're faking it every time I see you guys. But that must have been fun for you to see their relationship on screen. How well did their relationship on screen reflect your relationship in real life? There is a very funny scene when you're at the door and you say that Jodi needs to kind of take the lead on when someone answers the door. And anyway, you make a joke about her being short.
Less intimidating, I think.
Yes, less intimidating.
It's funny. I mean, Katie, it's such a good question because I actually think that might be like kind of the wildest thing about the whole movie for me because I mean, we use the sister analogy, like we feel we've kind of become sisters through this experience, but it is also like a marriage. And and it's a real marriage. Like like friends warned me a couple of years ago that a lot of these work partnerships become very performative, or they break up, and there's like this outward, there's this outward partnership that other people see, but like the core, is hollow or rotten in some way. And we've made a decision that we did not want to be like that. So this is like a very real relationship where, I mean, even when there's not some crazy movie thing going on, we're talking to each other about our reporting, our own lives. We sit facing one another in the newsroom.
Yeah.
I can't really imagine making like an important life decision without talking to you.
We live 10 blocks away from each other.
Oh,
right?
that's so nice.
Yeah, and it's, and I feel like, I guess I do really feel like we're on an intellectual and personal journey together. And also that because, I mean, listen, we had no idea that this story was going to have any impact. And so ever since 2017, this movie is only the latest example of us being thrown into some sort of situation where we were like, okay, how are we going to make good decisions here? How are we going to handle this?
And it's so nice that you have each other to be sounding boards and to check your judgment and your guts, to have sort of a sister type person to really talk things through with, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. And so I think for that to be captured on screen is really special. Obviously, it feels like when you're in it, and experiencing like the rainbow of colors, and emotions, involved in your own relationship with the person, it feels a little different. But I think what a critical mass of people have seen the movie early, and one of the biggest responses we're getting is just what a pleasure it is to see this kind of female collaboration on film. We're not movie people, but even as audience members, we were searching our minds for like other films that are led by two female partners and two professional women who are work collaborators and who are there primarily because of their brains, and who are both like kind of agents, who are like both driving the action. And it is incredibly rare. So, I just feel so lucky that we get to share that part of our relationship with people. And I think people are going to really identify with it because it's so common in the real world, even if Hollywood is a little behind in representing it.
What about one of the things I loved about the movie, among many things, is this movie really focused on not only the power of journalism, but the excitement of journalism, the mission of journalism. And this is a tough time for journalists. As you know, distrust in the media, I think, is at an all-time high. And do you hope that this will, encourage young people? I feel like I'm 90 whenever I say young people. But young people to go into journalism. And do you think that it will restore some amount of faith in the institution, the critically important institution of journalism, even though that has a broad definition these days?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this movie is coming out in some ways at the perfect time. I mean, at a moment in this country's evolution where you've got these claims of fake news and such polarization and what can sometimes feel like a breakdown of our basic understanding of the facts. I think to see a movie that really depicts step by step what it takes to actually report out a story with accuracy and with integrity, and all of the challenges that we have to overcome to press that publish button and send something out to press. I think
it's such an exciting moment
in
the movie when they click published,
It's a spoiler alert. I think everybody knows how this movie ends.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think I feel like it's going to be both. I think it's going to be an entertaining public service for people to see how that process actually works and to also see the power of the truth. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we initially wanted to write our book was that it really felt like this was a story that kind of stood out in the fact that there was such consensus around. Nobody was sort of challenging whether or not this story was accurate. I mean, there wasn't sort of a splintering of understanding or perceptions of whether this story was accurate. It really was a rare moment in which sort of all readers seemed to agree, okay, they actually found the truth and they've reported it, and there's not a debate over what happened. The real debate is over what needs to happen in response. And so we really wanted to take readers behind the scenes and show them the process of executing a story like that created such consensus.
When All the President's Men came out, I believe in 1976, it inspired a whole generation of people to go into journalism. Do you hope, Jodi, that in some ways this does the same thing?
I think it's already happening. I hope the movie helps, but Megan and I have visited a lot of campuses in the last couple of years, and we're blown away by the level of interest in journalism because, I mean, this next generation, like, they're looking for work with meaning. They're looking for work that can have impact. And some of them are already doing it. The load that student journalists are carrying right now, back in my day, student journalism was more like, reporting the high school basketball scores. Now these college students are, they're writing about COVID policy on campus. They're writing about sexual assault.
Climate change,
like really serious controversies embroiling their campuses. And so I hope this makes them feel really invited, Katie. I want them to see the New York Times not as something, remote and elitist, but as a place that's accessible to them. And I also, maybe this is too much to ask, but I find the newsroom so comforting. Like when I walk in there, just knowing that this paper, that it has the right values of inquiry and truth, that everybody there is just so dedicated to serving our readers, that the place is, that it's like an institution that, even though it's not perfect, has really lived its values for a very long time. I like, given the tumult of our world right now, I find the place comforting.
I can understand that. I love newsrooms.
Yeah.
I love the idea of people kind of working together, all committed to helping people understand the world or uncovering the truth. There's something so... I mean, I miss going to a newsroom all the time, not only kind of the cacophony of all the things, although now it's much more quiet because everyone has their earbuds in and they're working on their computers. But, just the sensibility and the teamwork and the fact that you have like-minded, maybe too many like-minded colleagues working, all together for one goal. I don't think there's any place like it.
Amen. Yeah. Amen.
And before we go, because I know you all have a meeting, but when it comes to the Me Too movement, and I know you all have been asked about this a lot, but what do you think the legacy of your reporting and really the entire movement is? We know that Tarana Burke really started this for young Black women much earlier than when it became sort of known to the public. I guess my question is two parts. Do you think that Black and brown women have been brought into the Me Too fold enough? And what do you think is the legacy of this movement, really spearheaded by your unparalleled reporting? So let me ask the first question first. Megan, the issue about brown and Black women, and I would even argue women of a lower socioeconomic status, women who are on the factory floor, women who are, working menial jobs, domestic workers, et cetera.
Listen, I think it's a really important question. And I had been doing coverage of sex crimes and sexual misconduct for years, actually, before the Weinstein story, and had done, I worked at the Chicago Tribune and did many stories there looking at sex crimes in which Black and brown and women were primarily the victims, and the injustice that they received from the criminal justice system, from these other systems that were, doing very little to protect them, and
Right.
allowing sort
Or
of
to
those
punish
predators,
their
or to
abusers.
punish their abusers. And so it was interesting when we first started the Weinstein story, and the movie actually depicts that I had some skepticism about actually reporting into these, initially thinking that this was going to be a story that was just about famous, primarily like white Hollywood actresses. And it took me, there's a true to life scene in which I'm actually kind of pressing Jodi on that. And I'm saying, is this the best use of our resources to be, don't these women have voices of their own? Do they really need the help and the resources of the New York Times? And she said, listen, if this is happening to women in Hollywood, then nobody's protected if it's also happening to these famous actresses. And so I think that there's no question that there was a correlation between kind of the face of the Weinstein story and the impact that it had. But I think that what's clear as well is that at least the journalism that's taken place at the New York Times, this was one of many stories that the Times did on sexual harassment and
Right.
sexual abuse.
That's true.
That reported into all different types of workplaces and onto factory floors, into the service industry, looking at women from all different types of backgrounds. And so I think that there's no question that at least at the New York Times there was a real commitment to make sure that this obviously ended up being one story that had kind of an outsized impact and helped kind of make this movement go viral. But it was in no way the only thing that was covered. And I think we've seen, and I think one of the things that's happened, especially because Tarana Burke was the one who had actually launched Me Too to begin with, and has become, I think, even more of a public figure in these last 5 years. I mean, it's just been incredible to watch her making sure, constantly pushing to make sure that Black and brown women get and receive the attention that they deserve within this broader social movement, which is, taking interesting twists and turns. And I think what's important to know is that 5 years after this movement went viral, I think it's interesting to have this movie come out that takes you back to these like first hushed phone calls when there was nothing guaranteed about our reporting, and there was, if anything, we kept hearing like nobody's going to care. You can report the story, you go ahead and publish it, little ladies, and nothing's going to change. Good luck thinking that this is going to make a difference. And so, boy, were they wrong. And so exactly where Me Too stands 5 years later and where it's headed. And I mean, that's something that Jodi and I will continue to report on. But we also are very clear about the fact that we're reporters, we're not activists, we're not advocates, we're not policymakers. We can't fix all of the problems of the world. It's our job to just try to bring them to light as best as we can.
I wonder if people would have paid attention to this if it hadn't been celebrities. I mean, you've got that too, in terms of the Gwyneth Paltrows of the world, the Ashley Judds of the world. If you had talked about some of these women who were suffering these indignities for years, if people would have read it and if it would have had the impact it did.
That's what one of our editors, Matt Purdy, who's depicted in the film, says sometimes. He's remarked a few times in the last few years that this was the first big sexual harassment story in which the women actually had more prestige and credibility than the man who was accused. But listen, I mean, you asked what the legacy, of this whole story is, and I think it's a few things. I think it's that really just a very small group of brave sources can have enormous impact, worldwide impact, really from pretty much just a handful of people who were willing to work with us. I think it's the question of how it is that these experiences can be so common. And the uprising we saw in 2017 was about how women all over the world who actually had very little in common, economically, religiously, culturally, and yet they all had the same stories. How is it? How could this behavior be so universal? I think we're still grappling, with what that means. But then I think the final legacy is the question of how you confront a bully. It's a really hard question. I feel like I've been, struggling with that question since third grade. How do you confront a bully? that there is an answer. And I feel like what I learned through this work is that you do it together. You do it together. A Harvey Weinstein is not, in fact, invincible, even when everybody thinks he is.
Well, I have to say, getting to know both of you has been really one of the high points for me the last several years, and I'm so impressed by both of you as reporters and as human beings. So thank you for coming by and talking to all of our listeners about this movie, and more importantly about journalism and about your careers. So I love being with you guys, so thank you.
Well,
Thanks,
likewise,
Katie.
Katie. Thank you so much.